Hello firearms friends, I'm Joel Colander for Rock Island Auction Company, and today we have a pretty large topic to discuss, literally. The name of the game today is punt guns. Now this phenomenal example comes to us from the good folks at MeatEater. We'll get into that story in a little bit, but first to cover, MeatEater is consigning this through Rock Island Auction Company with all of their proceeds to be donated to their land access initiative. To that end, Rock Island is also waiving a consigner's fee for that so we can maximize those donations back for conservation and getting public land access. Now, if you're from the MeatEater audience and you're new to Rock Island Auction Company, hello, welcome. We are Rock Island Auction Company. We are the #1 auction house in the world for fine and historic firearms. On this channel and our social media platforms, we tend to show some pretty amazing and world-class firearms, so give us a follow. We will make it worth your while. And if you're part of our regular Rock Island Auction Company audience and you haven't heard of MeatEater, you may be living under a rock. MeatEater is one of the nation's top companies for wildlife and conservation content. Of course, they're covering things like hunting, they're covering things like conservation and public land access. They're also covering cuisine with wild game. They're also covering hunting in different cultures, different regions, different areas of the country, and then of course the people who do that and who fill those stories. So if you do like hunting, fishing, conservation in any of its shapes and forms, they probably have a podcast, a series, a something for you. Personal shout out to the Bear Grease podcast and Blood Trails if you're looking for a recommendation. Now, let's get down to business. Let's talk about punt guns. And in my mind, there's two schools of thought for punt guns. There's sort of the common knowledge that everybody knows, and then there's the stuff that threatens to be kind of washed away by history. Let's cover the basics first, then we can get into a little bit more of a deep dive on a punt gun. And the common knowledge is, first of all, what is a punt gun? And frankly, it's a big old shotgun you put in a boat. And that boat is called a punt. They are very, very low above the surface of the water. They have a very shallow draft, so you can really scoot through some of these shallow waters, because what you're after is migratory waterfowl, or lots of forms of waterfowl in general. And you are going to lay prone in the boat with this punt gun, essentially over the stem, right out over the bow of the boat. And you're laying prone in there, and you have two little hand paddles, and you paddle your way up to or close enough to a flock of migratory waterfowl. You line up the boat with it, and then you fire. And with obviously a charge and a firearm of this size, you're going to knock down more than one if you're doing what you're supposed to. Now, these can look like artillery, as we see here. We even have like some cannon-like trunnions over here at my left, or they can just look like an oversized rifle or an oversized shotgun. And of course, as most firearms evolve, the punt gun is not immune from that. Now, what they're famous for, besides being just a massive, instantly recognizable gun, are the commercial, unsustainable, either market hunting or commercialized hunting that happened in the 19th century and the early 20th century. You see that with a desire to get meat into urban areas, and you just see that with, it's traditionally cited, since we're covering that knowledge, of the feathers, and what's often cited is the feathers for women's fashion, specifically hats. And that everybody's going out and slaughtering waterfowl with punt guns for these two purposes. And some of that's true. There was a living to be made. There was demand that needed to be met for both meat and fashion and feathers and what have you. The real story is a little bit deeper than that, but even that surface level history, like that's enough to get the good folks at MeatEater interested in it, right? This was an extremely popular form of hunting, both in the UK and here in the East Coast, the New England area of the United States. You have multiple cultures participating in this. It obviously affected the landscape for migratory waterfowl. It changed their population numbers on a nationwide level, and of course, it eventually affects legislation. So you have all these things that MeatEater is going to take a big interest in. It's what they do so well. Now, what I'd like to do is look past a little bit of the bad reputation, of looking past the sheer size of this barrel, the size of these shell casings, and looking at what punt gunning really is. And frankly, it's a lost art. It doesn't start off as this big commercialized villain. This is a working man's pastime. Starting off with, if you can take a few ducks on a boat, maybe specifically for that purpose, or maybe you're out fishing and you can knock a few down and take them home to feed your family or your neighbors. Or maybe you can sell some at market, because at that point, selling game in a wild market was a very viable form to earn a living. You could earn a meager living, or you could earn a lot. And people discovered they could earn a lot. So you turn it from this working man's pastime. Once you start introducing more and more of that sort of commercialized efficiency, is where things start to take a turn for the worse, not only for wildlife, but also the punt gun and the sport of punting as well. So of course, towards the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, people are starting to realize the sheer numbers that are missing from their skies and their waterways. And that's kind of the light at the end of the tunnel, not the diminished numbers, but the people realized it. And you start to see some legislation passed for limits, season limits, et cetera, to help preserve these endangered or nearly, on the brink of extinction species, so that we have them for future generations. And of course, after the bans of hunting and of punt gunning and of limits, of course, commercialized punting basically dies off right away, right? There's no more money in it. They have no more incentive to do it. So who's left to carry on punting and punt gunning but the sportsmen? The sportsmen, the hunters, the real hunters, who are there to carry on this art. And of course, the working man now has other ways to make money, right? We're in the early 20th century. And so the working man doesn't take it up. The sportsmen do, but so do the well-to-do. Because it's not a way to put bread on the table anymore. Now it's a sport for people who have boats and have access to very, very large punt guns. So interesting transition, interesting history there from working man to commercialized to the well-to-do and the true sportsman. In fact, speaking of well-to-do, there were punt gun salutes in 1897 for Queen Victoria's Jubilee. There are still punt gun salutes, although I've seen the footage of them. They are largely artillery pieces, but this is also essentially an artillery piece. Like I said, we have trunnions. Anytime you have trunnions, that's a pretty good sign. Now, what I'd like to talk about, besides the sort of deeper history, is the true lost art of punt gunning. Now, I had the pleasure to be on the MeatEater podcast, and it had done some research with some period books, and the amount of knowledge required for punting. I will go on a limb here and say there is no other form of hunting that requires such a broad knowledge base. And I'm a hunter of other things as well, so hear me out. Of course, you have equipment like your punt, the boat itself. What type of wood should you make with that? What shape should the hull be? Should it be rounded or square on the bottom like a coffin? What shape is the bow? Where do you put the gun truly in relation? Do you put it amidship, or do you put it sort of more astern to deal with that huge recoil? What color do you paint it? Where do you put things to secure this in the gun? Like if you have rings, you wouldn't put them up top. Would you want metal? Would you want wood? All sorts of things, and that's just the punt. What about the gun itself? And of course, it's almost an unfair question, because those have evolved so much, from flintlocks to percussion to pin fire to cartridge. But a lot of questions remain regardless of the era, like how do you secure it in the boat? Do you tie it from the trunnions? Do you mount it on a stanchion? Do you have it on a plank that can recoil in the boat? Do you tie it down with rope? If so, what rope? Really dense rope, or rope that has a good deal of stretch, or somewhere maybe right in the middle? If you're using a muzzleloader, what are you using for wadding? Are you using old sail, or are you using oakum? What kind of powder are you loading it with? Coarse? Fine? Does it depend on the weather? So when you pour it down the barrel, you can make sure it's not sticking to the sides, that you're actually getting your powder charge where you want it, towards the breech. When you fire it, where should you be positioned so that when that recoil comes, you're not missing a few teeth or being knocked unconscious, or worse, because your head is 6 inches essentially from a massive explosion as you're laying on your belly? How do you protect the lock from salt water as you're so close to the sea? And of course, often, as duck hunters know, in inclement weather. And then there's the hunt itself. Elevation of the barrel, your primary consideration. You shoot too high, you're over the flock. You shoot too low, your shot ends up short. It needs to be almost like Whipping a fly fishing line on the water, there needs to be a section where your shot pattern falls, and that needs to fall on the flock. So how much powder should you use? Are you using the right kind of shot for the type of bird that you've spotted? How do those things relate? Is your powder going to push a larger shot size far enough? What kind of distance is that going to cover? And of course, can you stalk those birds in their native habitat to that appropriate distance and then line up your boat and then take the shot? There's also environmental factors like the sea, the tides, the wind. A small boat on a windy day is not a good day for a punter at all. And then are you hunting the coast, the marsh, the muddy flats, the inlets, not to mention the physical work of hauling a massive gun, towing your punt, and then the shoulder work required to paddle yourself out to find your quarry. I just think the knowledge base required, the skill required for a successful punt hunt is immense and incredible. In fact, some of their success rates for a non-commercial hunter, a true sportsman, they're actually quite low because this type of hunting is so difficult, despite having such a massive, what we think of as an advantage, right? With a gun of this size, but it's so cumbersome, it's so hard to use, and you're sneaking up to waterfowl on their native turf. It's an incredibly difficult, incredibly knowledge-based and skill-filled type of hunting that I can only hope doesn't die out, that there's still ways to objectively participate in it and still adhere to lawful limits and things that'll still keep our waterfowl around for generations. Now, there are 2 books on the subject specifically that I found that are a wealth of knowledge on the subject. One is The Waterfowlers by Faulkner, and the other is by one of the most famous punters of all time. His book is Introductions to Young Sportsmen and All That Relates to Gun and Shooting by Hawker. Find those books. They're easy to download, easy to find on an EPUB or an e-reader, and they're really, really inexpensive. And if you want to deep dive into just how complex and what kind of knowledge base exists for this type of hunting, those are definitely 2 books to check out. Now let's take a look at this punt gun on the table. First of all, we don't usually show width beyond the table, so that should give you a pretty good estimate of just how large this thing is. This is a Holland Holland. Obviously, we're dealing with a cartridge firing gun. It's made in about 1885, give or take a few years there, in the 1880s for sure. This is a single barrel, 2-bore punt gun. And 2 bores, the same way we get with all our shotgun measurements, right? You take a pound of lead, you cut it in 2 pieces, and if each one of those pieces were a perfect sphere, that is the diameter there at the barrel. So a monstrous, monstrous charge that this is going to fire, in case you couldn't tell from the size of the brass here. Now, the barrel is 85.5 inches long. The barrel alone, this sort of stock and action here gives you another maybe 12 to 14 inches. So you're getting up there. The shell is about 9 1/4. I will say this is a steel shell that came with it when we first sold it to MeatEater several years ago. And I hope that was helpful because they had brass shells made. And this is one of them. And you can see the MeatEater logo sort of engraved there on the bottom. They were selling several of the ones that had been fired up the spent brass cases. But if you buy the gun, now you have a solid brass shell that you know is functional with this particular punt gun. And speaking of functional, let's talk about the condition of this. First of all, it's a Holland Holland. That is a very, very high-end shotgun manufacturer, British best quality in every sense of the word, world-renowned. So it's funny, almost disconnected, to think of very, very high-end shotguns and hear this very utilitarian tool, right? With gray paint on the barrel, original gray paint, mind you, but gray paint on the barrel. We don't think of Holland Holland in those ways, but think about how popular punting must have been in the mid-1880s for a manufacturer, a high-end manufacturer like Holland Holland, to want to get in on the act. They're like, oh, there's a market share there and we can make money by selling guns to punters. Fantastic. And here, of course, is the action. It's quite heavy, quite front heavy, as it should be. We have wonderful wood. Of course, it's from Holland Holland. Much nicer wood than one could expect to see on a punt. And this is the only punt gun I've seen that's been engraved. Of course, it's Holland Holland. Their name, of course, engraved very large here on the top tang, but then it scrolls around to this wonderful, sort of foliate scroll. The screw heads are engraved with the flower blossoms, as you would see on a high-end shotgun. Turning it around, of course, you have it on this brass plate. You even have it on the cocking trigger here. And there's even a small game scene of a bird engraved here just in front of our trigger mechanism. Now you'll notice there's no stock on this, and that's because by and large a gun of this size was not meant to be fired from the shoulder whatsoever. This was very much to be mounted in a boat. As we know, they come in all sorts of different sizes, from an 8-bore that maybe you could fire from a shoulder, to 4-bores which you could fire from the shoulder, but many people wouldn't, to the 2-bores and even 1-bores. But a beautiful, beautiful shotgun, and this is what's known as a screw mechanism. You would put your shell in your breech. The rim of the shell is meant to fit in here, so once that's sitting in your breech, you can slide this over the rim of your shell, push it home the rest of the way, and then screw this into the barrel. A much easier way than muzzle loading some of these guns, especially when you're trying to re-muzzle load in a very unsteady punt. Imagine trying to muzzle load something like this in, say, a canoe for modern context. Breech loaders were an absolute godsend for punters who might take normally 10 minutes to reload, could now do it in a matter of minutes, and they could do it one man at a time or not have to go ashore. It was a revolution for them. So, not sure how many are still out there in firing condition, but as the video from MeatEater shows, this Holland Holland clearly still up for the task. So whether you're a hunter yourself, or you just love the history of waterfowling and the heritage, maybe you collect decoys, maybe you're just the world's biggest MeatEater fan, well, have we got a punt gun for you. In our August 21st through 23rd premier firearms auction there in Bedford, Texas. We're open to the public. Please join us, especially on August 20th. That's the day before the sale. It's a full day of preview where you can come and put these guns in your hand, as well as hundreds and hundreds of other fine and historic firearms that are going to be in that sale. If you can't make it, hop over to the website. Not only do we have photos of this, but of course the other hundreds of guns, and it's where you can place your bids as well. We hope you enjoyed. MeatEater fans, we hope you come back and join us another time. Until next time, keep your powder dry.